Okay, very good. All right. This class was started since Rabbi Steinsaltz had a stroke 2 years ago now. Almost 2 years ago now. So we started this class in order to speak on his behalf, so to speak his words on his behalf, and that would hopefully, trigger his ability to speak once again. But in addition to this, now just a few weeks ago, we also started with a special psalm in order for God to bless him with that full and speedy recovery, and particularly to bless him with that ability once again to speak his holy words of Torah and to continue to communicate with all of us. So I do want to say a special psalm on his behalf. This psalm, by the way, as we mentioned in the past, is a psalm that was spoken about by Rabbi Steinsaltz and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, during an unexpected encounter that they had on the footsteps of 770, the headquarters of Chabad. And he went and he spoke to the Rebbe, and they spoke for about 45 minutes on the footsteps. And Hasidim, until this very day, speak of that encounter. No one really knows what they spoke about, except the fact that his son has mentioned that they spoke about Psalm 45, which coincidentally speaks of this power of speech. So who knows why these two giants of spirit were speaking of that psalm. Maybe it was because maybe the Rebbe foresaw the stroke that he would have, and he himself was saying the psalm there at that moment on his behalf. So who are we not to say the psalm on Rabbi Steinsaltz's behalf, especially that this is the goal of the class. So I'm going to recite the psalm again for the full and speedy recovery of Rabbi Steinsaltz, Rabbi Adin ben Rivka Leah. This is it, Psalm 45. All right, let's continue where we left off. 59, that's what I thought. So just to recap very quickly, so we're speaking, of course, this chapter is a chapter of holiness. We said that there are three realms of holiness in our world. There's the realm of Olam, realm of Shana, realm of Nefesh. There are places in this world that are holy, designated as holy by God. There are times in this world, Shana, which means year or times in this world that are designated holy, like the Shabbat, like the holidays. And there are people in this world that are designated holy, or that become holy through God's actions, through God's tools of becoming holy. So right now we're still speaking about that second dimension of, I think, right, of times that become holy. Soon he'll be speaking about the tzaddik and people who become holy too. But we're up to page 59, towards the bottom of the page. Is that what it is? Right? Since the sanctity? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, does anyone, so speaking of the holidays, and again, times that are holy, we continue on here with the sanctity of the holiday. Does anyone want to read? Bottom of page 59. Please. Right. So let's stop there. I just want to recap what we said last time, and that is that when we are celebrating a holiday, whether it's Passover, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, you name it, when we celebrate a holiday, we're not just celebrating the significance of the holiday from a historic perspective. What we're celebrating is a guest in the room. That's how we called it last time. There's a guest in the room, which is a slice of holiness in the room. Passover, Mr. Passover is in the room, Passover. Mr. Holiness, the holiness of Passover is in the room. It's not just a historic event that we're commemorating and that we're using our mind to think of the past, but it's something that's happening right there and then. That's the holiness of the day. And here what he's saying is exactly that. There are some days that are historical days only, where that guest is not in the room. Days where we commemorate history. But the holy days that we have are days of holiness, not just of history. Days in which holiness is in the room. And therefore, in order to celebrate those days, we can't just speak about our ancestors in Egypt who were redeemed. It's a good thing to speak about that. But we also have to speak and become in tune with the holiness of the day. That Passover is much more about the story, but it's about us becoming free. It's about us now using the energy of the day to release ourselves from any boundaries, any limits, any restrictions that we may be experiencing in life. That's how you truly celebrate these holidays and connect to the holiness of the day, by making it something that's very holy, a holy experience, not just a holy memory. I want to add one more thing about holy days, and that is that this is connected to what God decided. We don't decide when these holy days are there. God decided when these holy days take place. So we can't just, we can't decide. I'm sorry, we can't decide from now on Shabbat will take place on Sunday morning. It doesn't work. I know there was an attempt like that 300 years ago in Germany, during Germany. It doesn't work. God decides when that guest will come to your house, that Mr. Holiness will come to your house, or Mrs. Holiness. All right. Okay. Let's continue a little bit more.
Of course.
Right. And these days are therefore more days of history than days of holiness. By the way, what's interesting is that you can actually notice when these days of holiness take place in the Jewish calendar, and when there are days of just historic events, based on how much is demanded from us, how much involvement, how much engagement is demanded from us. So on Shabbat, we're told to cut off the world and change our habits, change the course of our lives. Why? Because Mr. Holiness is in the room. The holiness of Shabbat is in the room. So then you have to adapt in a much deeper way, in a much more transformative way than you would adapt to a historic day. Tisha B'Av, or these 9 days that precede Tisha B'Av, that lead to Tisha B'Av, are 9 days in which we commemorate the history, the sour, the bitter history of our people. But we don't change. We don't change clothes like we do on Shabbat. We don't switch off the phones. We don't change our meals. There's not much change there, again, because these are only days of. So the more change is demanded of a person, the more it alludes to the idea that this is a holy day that you have to adapt to. Or sometimes for the world. But there are times in which God gives us a slice of holiness in a very individual, personal way. There are times like that. I think there's times when, we spoke about, if you remember, during the 3rd chapter, the soul of man, we spoke about this revelation of the Yechidah Shebanefesh, the deepest part of the soul, the 5th, when it reveals itself. That's a time, a moment, if it does reveal itself, that God triggered, that God decided for it to be holy. So there are times, very individual times, in which holiness does manifest itself. It's interesting that holiness is a two-way street, not a one-way street like historic days. So in order for us to become in tune with holiness and to elevate ourselves to the level of holiness and thereby to become holy, we have to make changes in our lives. It doesn't just befall a person. It's not automatic. And the more changes you make, the more, the deeper the connection you'll have to that holiness. The days that necessitate the most change are the days that are most holy. Shabbat asks us to change 180 degrees from our weekdays. But that's again because the holiness of Shabbat is so strong that you have to change so strongly. Chol HaMoed, which are the intermediary days that are found in the 3 major holidays on Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, and you don't find them Shavuot, sorry, on Passover and Sukkot. Those intermediary days are days in which you can continue to go to work, try to minimize work, but drive and so on. These are days with less holiness, and therefore the change that's demanded upon a person is also less significant. So the more the holiness, the more you have to adapt to it. You have to change yourself, which is a big idea of life, that if you want to grow, you have to be able to change. And that's in a way alluded in Prophet Ezekiel. Prophet Ezekiel talks about the difference between angels and human beings. Angels are given a dose of holiness that they cannot change, that they can't have any power over. If an angel is given just 3 ounces of holiness, that's how he stays for his entire creation. He can't affect that. Human beings can. If a human being is given a dose of holiness, he can increase that. How? Through his actions, through his change. And that's why we are called, in the words of Ezekiel, we are called mehalchim. The verse says, which means we are called people that walk, that move forward, that change. While the angels are called people or beings that stand still. There's no movement there. No movement of holiness. No movement of anything, but also of holiness. They're still. That's what makes us higher than angels. The potential to be higher than angels. Because the more we adapt, again, the more we become in tune, the more we change our ways to receive this holiness, the more we become holy, even holier than angels. But again, so this paragraph again teaches us that holiness is a two-way street. To put it in a very simple way, but I think that, and maybe I've said this before, but there are two words in the English language that we think are synonymous or can live well together, but they really can't. One word is convenience or comfort. Another word is meaning. Meaning, if you're searching for meaning, it means that you have to inconvenience yourself. You have to come out of your comfort zone. If you're searching for meaning, that means you have to be open to change. And that means you probably have to make steps in your life that will make you very uncomfortable. If you're searching for comfort, you probably won't find meaning in that comfort. Fortunately, our society thinks that, and we're sold comfort all the time, and we think that, yes, if you're comfortable, you have meaning. So if you have a lot of money, you'll find happiness. It doesn't work that way. Why? But it goes back to this root idea that the more holiness we want to have in our lives, the more we want to become holy, the more inconvenient it is, the more we have to come out of our comfort zones. And that fear is justifiable in a way, because to grow means to become unstable. Rabbi Steinsaltz uses that example in a book in his commentary on the Tanya, that if you look at someone climbing a ladder, the only way a person can climb a ladder, maybe we've mentioned this, but the only way a person can climb a ladder is if he destabilizes himself. You have to stand on one foot in order to climb. If you stand on 2 feet, you can't climb. You'll stay on the same ramp the whole time. So that destabilization causes fear, because you don't know, you might fall. But on the other hand, that's the only way you can grow. And that's why when we experience failures, or when we experience falls or instabilities in life, we can't look at them as failures, as falls. It's one way to look at them, but the other way is actually that's instability now is going to cause me to grow. It's an opportunity to grow. But that's right, for children and adults. Absolutely, I think adults in a way need that more. You see, it's interesting because adults in a way are the ones that really need to become unstable. They search. As adults, we search. We've changed so much. As children, we've grown so much that we search for stability. I think by the time someone is in his 20s, then we want to say, let me just settle. Let me, box my life. And this is the way it's going to be, and I'm not going to change much until I die. If that's the way you live, then you won't find meaning. Then you won't grow. Children need to be told that less because they naturally grow. Absolutely. King Solomon says that, right? He says there's a time for war and time for peace. There's a time for everything. So there's a time for that movement. But even within the peace, you have to have growth. So it might not be the big battles of life that you're fighting. The most growth has to happen within peace. Why? Because the growth that happens when it's not with peace is not real growth. It's external growth. Real growth happens only when you're in peace with yourself. Then you can face yourself in the mirror, and then you can grow eternally. I think it's like countries. So when we have wars, you can say we're growing. If we become victorious eventually, but the question of any country is, can we maintain that peace, and can we cultivate it? Can we develop it after the war is over? That's when the growth truly happens. It's true for governments, it's true for wars, countries, it's true for human beings. When you're experiencing a challenge, yes, it's making you grow, but because you have no other choice. The question is, can you maintain that growth afterwards? And that's when real growth has to take place. If you can maintain that growth afterwards, then you've really grown. It's like in relationships. In relationships, I think when there's a crisis from the outside, naturally the spouses come closer together because you're trying to face off together this challenge. But then when there's no challenge, are you still as close towards one another? Are you still developing that growth? Now it's time to grow, and that's when the real growth can happen. It's a quiet growth. It's an internal growth, but I think it's the most crucial growth. That proves that your relationship is a relationship that's healthy when there's no wars to fight anymore, but you're doing it. You're cultivating yourself. You're growing by yourself. Then it means that this is a healthy relationship. This is the real growth. I will say this. That's why, in Psalm 23. I don't know if we've said this before, but Psalm 23 is probably the most famous psalm. It's a psalm that speaks of, even though I walk in a valley overshadowed by death, I fear no evil. I fear no evil, because you are with me. My rod and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You know that one. What's interesting is that King David is inconsistent grammatically in that psalm. The psalm begins with God being related to as a he. On lush meadows, he guides me, right? Yancheni, Yina'aleni. And then all of a sudden, God is spoken of as a you. I will fear no evil because you are with me. Can't King David be consistent? If God is a he, then let him be a he through the entire psalm, through the entire story. You can't say he and then say you. Make up your mind. And the answer is very powerful. What King David is teaching us is exactly that, exactly what we're speaking about. When things are fine, then God is a he. Then I don't need that connection. Then I can revert to my comfort zone. But if you do that, then you'll face a valley overshadowed by death. That's when you don't grow, it's an invitation for trouble. So even then, God has to be a you. God can't just be a you in the moment of crisis. Then you'll face crisis, then you'll say, oh God, no, it's you. It's not me. It's not him. Then God becomes a you in that psalm. But what King David is trying to tell us is that God can't just be a you. That connection can't just be developed in moments of crisis. It's easy then that you have no other choice. But when you're in lush meadows, can he be a you then too? Can you develop that growth? That's the big question of life. To grow even when you have no reason to grow. To quote another psalm, Psalm 33, I think, is a beautiful psalm that says, Lechu banim shimuli rat Hashem alametchem. We actually say it every Shabbat morning. No, 34, verse 12. But this psalm, it says, go, my children, and listen to me. I will teach you the fear of God, or the awe towards God. Now, King David is very exact with these words. Why does it say go? It should say, come, my children, I will teach you. Why go? And the answer is because of exactly what you said. When do you prove that you're really connected, that you have that fear of God? When you go out to the world. When you're in the synagogue, that's easy. When you're learning, it's easy. When you're in a circle, it's easy. You haven't proven anything. That's what you meant to do then. But what about when you're outside? And that's the real test. And that's the real test of growth. Dennis Prager is coming next weekend, and he's of one opinion, and I've heard other opinions of whether it's good for Jews to be dispersed in the world or not. And it's actually a Talmudic debate. And Talmud actually says, Taka asa kadosh baruch hu shepizran leven haumot. God made justice, or more than that, he was kind to the Jewish people, that he dispersed them among the nations. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? So some would say it's a bad thing because when you're together, you have this strong statement to the world, and you can build together, you can do things together. When you're dispersed, you're all over the place. But there's an opinion that says that actually it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Why? Because your identity as a Jew is built when faced with the non-Jewish world. If you're just within your community, if you're just living in Borough Park, if you're just living in Bnei Brak, then it's part of the norm. You don't really face your Judaism because you don't have to face it. You're living it. It's in the streets. You don't have to work at it. So in a way, it's that going out to the world that really builds us the most. God wants us to be in the world also. Make it grow, but to also make us grow. Anyway, so the idea, again, I want to continue, but the idea was that the more the holiness, the more the need to change, to become in tune with that holiness. Holiness is a two-way street. Let's continue at the top of page 60. Right, okay, good. So there are, what he was saying, which was your question before also, what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying, of course, there are individual days with individual doses of holiness. But the main holy days, where the holiness is most displayed, are the holy days that God designated at the beginning of time, in the Jewish calendar or in the calendar in general. I just want to relate to yahrzeits here, anniversaries of deaths, as he calls them, and birthdays, because even these holidays that are minor compared to the great holy days in the Jewish calendar, even these holy days have their own blessings of holiness, have their own Mr. Holiness that come to us individually. And that holiness also demands a little bit of change. So a yahrzeit of a person is what's a yahrzeit? Why do we commemorate yahrzeits? Why do we go to the graves of our loved ones on yahrzeits? And that's because on a yahrzeit, the soul comes down to this world. Every yahrzeit, the soul visits this world, and actually visits the world through the grave in which its body is found. And that's why people go to the grave, because that's where the soul is, on the yahrzeit. The full soul is. Now, in order to become in tune with that soul, we too have to make some changes. So there's Kaddish that you need to say, there's the actual visit of the grave, there's a candle that you light, there's different customs. So even those small holy days of holiness, also demand some changes. On birthdays are not just days of celebration. They're not just days of celebration, even though they deserve celebration, because as the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, that birth is God's way of saying that you matter. Right? We've said this. So it's a day in which you celebrate your unique existence in the world. But because you're celebrating it, you're also asking yourself, am I living up to it? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I living the way God wants me to live? Am I fulfilling the purpose for which I was created, that unique purpose? So birthday is also a day of tremendous contemplation, in a way of deep change. Again, to become in tune with that holiness that your birthday is for you. There's many practical customs, actually. There's a list of 10 customs that Jewish law offers on a birthday. One of them is to give more charity. The other one is to recite your psalm and study it. You know that for every person has his own psalm based on his age. So if I'm 27 years old, so which I'm not, my psalm would be Psalm 28, because that's year I'm marching into. So that's my psalm. So figure out what your psalm is based on your age. So yours would be 75.
Yeah,
right.
75.
So 75 from this point on. So one of the customs on the birthday is to study your psalm, because that psalm, it's not just a random psalm, but it's a psalm that speaks to you at that age. There's a message in that psalm that speaks to you. But there's still some message of connection, that when a person's loved one dies on their birthday, it means that it's a beautiful connection, because again, the soul comes down to this world and comes down on your birthday, which means that's where you find your deeper self. Again, so you have those customs of studying your psalm. You also have the custom of holding a little gathering with friends, and then you share your good resolutions based again. So even small days of holiness like birthdays, yahrzeits, and so on, even they demand a little bit of change. Because again, every force of holiness, if you wish to become in tune with it, it's a two-way street. Then there are the major holidays, but the small holidays too, as he was saying here in this paragraph. Let's continue a little bit more. A third aspect of holiness. Now he's not really, Rabbi Steinsaltz is transitioning to the third big realm that we haven't touched upon yet. So far we spoke about holiness as it manifests itself in places, in physical places in the world, like Jerusalem, or synagogues and so on. Holiness as it manifests itself in time, as we just spoke about. And now he's transitioning to the third realm of holiness as it manifests itself in human beings. Who wants to read? Right. So he lays out here three different channels of connection to holiness, to the holiness that God is. One channel is from your lineage. I know that the Baba Sali, I'm sure you've heard of him. The Baba Sali was a very holy Sephardic rabbi who was born in Morocco, but he died in Israel. He was known for his many, many miracles. People would come to him from all around the world, and I can tell you many stories about miracles that he performed. Just miracles out of this world. But he comes from the Abu Khatzera family, and many greats. Rabbi Steinsaltz has said that about the Abu Khatzera family. I've heard him say that. I know that Lubavitcher Rebbe said that about the Abu Khatzera. The Abu Khatzera family is a family of holy people. sometimes your lineage is just blessed by God, and you carry this tremendous gift of miracles, of performing miracles or things like that. So the Kohanim are like that. We have a Kohen here, and anyone else is a Kohen from the family of Kohen? So the Kohens were touched by God, so to speak, anointed by God as people who can bless, who have the power to bless. People have that layer of holiness. So you see, it's part of your lineage. That's one realm, one channel of connection. The more profound channels of connections are connections in which a person then really works on himself. He connects, he bounds himself to the Torah and to its commandments, and they become a part of his life. That what a person does is almost dictated by Torah. When I wake up in the morning, my first instinct is not to go and drink coffee, but rather to say Modani and to wash my hands. Why? Because God says so in the Torah. The more I shape my life and every moment of my life with God's instructions, the more I create room for God, and then the more God's holiness can flow through me or in me. That's another way. And then there's the deepest way, which he spoke of at the very end of the paragraph, and that's when you relinquish yourself. It's not just that you create room for God in your day-to-day, because when you create room for God in your day-to-day, they stole God and they stole you. It's two separate beings. This third way is where there is no you anymore. All you are is God. You don't even think about the coffee in the morning and the conflict that this coffee has with the washing of the hands and the saying the morning blessing. For you, it's so natural. It's become so one with you that you don't make room for you anymore. That explains why Rabbi Steinsaltz never took a day of vacation, just like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, by the way. It was never about him. Never. That's a tzaddik. It's not about me. It's God. I don't have time for my hobbies, my needs, my desires. And you could say it's unhealthy. Fine, but that's not how they think. It was always about God, about what God wants from me, not what I want from God. Maimonides says that we need a minimum of 6 to 8 hours, not more though. Okay. Because what sin does to you is that it creates this barrier. It's almost like you have this open flow, this open pipe between you and God, and sin comes and blocks a little bit of it. A little bit of it, not all of it. When you do teshuvah, it removes that blockage. Right, so it's all one before it starts piping down. So there is one collective soul, which is the soul of Adam. In fact, the Zohar also says that Adam is the initials of Adam. Aleph stands for Adam, Dalet stands for David, King David, and Mem stands for Mashiach. So it encompasses all of these three eras, all of the souls in those three eras, up until the Mashiach. So there's one collective soul, but that's as it is in its root, in its essence, in heaven. Here on earth, that soul goes through billions of pipes. Now, in this world, we live with our own soul. That's a part of the collective soul. In a way, the goal is to reconnect ourselves to the source. How do you do that? Through living this life. But the sins, as we spoke about, can block that pipe a little bit. Right. But on the other hand, when you do achieve that, then you also become holy. That's what he's saying. And that's why the Talmud says, tzaddik, there's an expression that goes, tzaddik gozer v'kadosh baruch hu mekayem. A tzaddik decrees, a righteous man, a holy man, can decree something, and God has to fulfill his decree. Even if God is not in agreement with the decree, God has to fulfill it. That's why I believe that when you receive a blessing from a righteous man, it's a decree of a righteous man. And the righteous man won't go against the will of God, but he can, in a way, channel the will of God. If you need something, then you're given. There's the Lubavitcher Rebbe, during one of his Hasidic gatherings, this was in 1966, if I'm not mistaken. It was Purim of 1966. During his Hasidic gathering, everyone was empowered and living by probably one of the most inspirational things you can experience. But he asked these Hasidim, okay, whoever wants to be wealthy right now, raise your hand. And people find intimidated, like we're in a spiritual environment, we're going to ask for materialistic things. So only 6 people raised their hands. And those 6 people became tremendously wealthy. And the thousands that did not raise their hand became full of regrets that they didn't raise their hand. But you see, sometimes a righteous man decrees something, it happens. See, that's the level of connection that they're holy, these righteous people, because they've relinquished the self. All right, 2 weeks from 2 weeks from now is like the eve of Thanksgiving. 21st, we're good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gila. Happy birthday again to Joyce. Thank you.